This is how you make me feel. This is how you make me feel.
All right, welcome back to the show, your unofficial Maple Leafs post-game breakdown. Battle of Ontario tonight was a very entertaining game to watch. It was a lot closer than it should have been. But the Leafs eventually take down the Sens 7-5 and in a hell of a game, honestly. The Battle of Ontario, especially on a Saturday night, it's always something that you want to watch, especially now that these two teams are pretty competitive. And it's kind of a lie about Toronto there, but you know what? When it comes to these two teams playing against each other, I always think it's a really good matchup to watch. So I was pretty satisfied with the effort tonight. As I said, it got a little bit closer there at the end than it should have been, but they pulled ahead, which was nice. I definitely think, with the offensive problems that the Leafs have had in the last little while, it's a game that's nice to see them kind of explode and actually get some offense. But again, it's 7-5. For Wall to have a pretty good game, there was a lot of points where he looked solid, but I also think that you had a typical night where your best goaltender in the franchise is, letting in 5 goals. That's for most games for the Leafs, that's a game that just is completely out of reach. So maybe it's one of those situations tonight where, the Leafs are putting up a lot of goals. So their defense kind of, slacks a little bit, knowing that they have the offense, but it's still real no excuse to let in 5 goals like that. Like, I think the defense had some problems tonight in terms of man-to-man coverage. There was a couple guys left open. Guys are running into each other, so it wasn't the cleanest defensive game. But luckily, the offense was there and it bailed them out. So, you can't hate on it too much tonight. But I still think that it's definitely something you got to clean up and get tighter at, because as we've seen, there's so many games this year where it's the defense that loses it. It's frustrating. And speaking of defense, while we're on it, God bless Morgan Riley for being here for so long, but I think he needs to change. It sucks to say that, because as someone who's watched Morgan Riley for so long, he's been here for at least a decade or more. Whenever you think of the Leafs, Morgan Riley's one of those core players who's been here for so long. He's a staple on the team. He's one of those really steadying guys in the room. But I just think his play has been quite lacking of late. And at this point in his career and where the Leafs are at right now, I think it's beneficial for both parties to move on. See what you can get for Riley out in the market there. See what kind of trades are going on. I think that, I'd like to see him have success as a player over having him stay here as a Maple Leaf and just kind of just fade into the background, I guess. It sucks to say that, but I want to see him succeed and hopefully win something in his career. I don't think it's going to happen here. I think that you could get a half decent trade package for Riley in the market right now. It would help the Leafs out a little bit. I don't know what you would get back for him, whether they try to go for forwards, which I think they have enough of. The forwards they have that seem to contribute more, or they'd go for a D for D swap. I don't know how that would work, but I think it's worth exploring. For Morgan Riley's sake right now, it's something that's got to be checked out. So before this game, Leafs hire Steve Sullivan from the Marlies to oversee the power play, which was a bit of interesting news, which I was kind of excited at, actually. I was happy the Leafs, got another coach and moved somebody into that role. I kind of assumed that, they would just leave that role blank, because that seems to kind of be how the Leafs are rolling lately, with cutting roles and kind of just downsizing, I would say, in terms of staff and coaching members. With Shanahan gone, and they're just trying to streamline it, I think, a little bit. So nice to see them bring in somebody new. He was on the Marlies for a little bit, not that long, but he appears to know what he's doing. The power play scored twice tonight, 40 seconds in. It was Nylander. So for one game, I guess, it's looking better. It's positive. I'm happy to see that. I don't know if it's just because it's a new coach bounce, or You're playing the Sens, which just we seem to, don't really have a problem scoring on them. But maybe it was a bit of both tonight. But either way, I'm happy with it. I think the power play looked a lot more offensive minded than in other times. So maybe it's back on track. Obviously, it's one game. We're gonna have to see how it looks in the next couple games. But I'm happy that at least for one game it looked like it had a little bit of life to it, which was good, and it was actually dangerous. Because if the Leafs can continue that and get this power play chugging a little bit, instead of it being 13.3%, worse than the league, it can definitely, save them in a lot of games and help them just get a couple more wins, put some points on the board, and it could be one of the reasons that this season isn't as big of a disaster as it's looking right now. So it's one bright spot, which is nice. Um, yeah, Nylander scores in the power play like 40 seconds in. He looked good tonight. Looked like he kind of has his mojo back a little bit. So I was happy to see that. He ended up leaving the game in the second period with a lower body injury, which is pretty strange. I don't really think I've ever seen Nylander leave a game early with an injury. It rarely happens. He's very good at dodging checks, and kind of just being pretty slippery out there that nobody really seems to be able to get to him too much. So I don't know when it happened or how it happened, but it's not good, especially somebody who's leading the team in points right now with 41 points, and it's just a huge factor on our offense. There was a period there we didn't score for like 11 games, and that just clearly killed us. It made a huge dent and how many games we even had a shot in, right? So I don't know. It's a bit alarming to see that tonight. Hopefully he gets back as quick as possible because yeah, I mean I don't think he's going to be out that long. He never seems to actually stay out too long with injuries unless there are phantom headaches or something in the playoffs. I'm not going to go into that, but I hope he returns pretty quickly and it's nothing too serious. Maybe a little strain, maybe just something felt awkward tonight, but we'll have to see how that turns out. So yeah, as I said, Nylander 41 points is he's the point leader for the Leafs right now, which is it's nice to see. With Marner being gone, someone's got to step up into that role and put some more points on the board. I think he's having a half decent year, but for the leader of the Leafs right now in points to have 41 is kind of alarming. Like I understand like you can't compare everybody to Connor McDavid, and I get it. He's kind of in his own little stratosphere there, but McDavid, previous to the game that he's playing tonight, which he'll probably get a couple of points in, he's at 67 points right now. McDavid alone. Like I think Matthews is on pace for, I mean, after tonight, like 60 or something like that the whole season. So I just, I still think there's a lot more this offense could be doing. And I get you can't compare everything to McDavid, but it's just frustrating to see, Nylander. I mean, it's nice to see Nylander be leading in that, but I mean, even with Matthews, like Matthews was always considered the 1A to McDavid's, like they were 1A, 1B kind of. It's a comparison that was thrown out a lot. And then it just seems like McDavid has continued his ascent into glory, and Matthews has kind of just gotten worse after that 69 goal season. There's been some injuries, there's been some maybe some unknown factors that have contributed to it, but it's tough to see someone like Matthews, be on pace for 60 points. It's kind of alarming. So, we'll see how the rest of this season goes. I still think there's a lot more for Matthews to give. I don't think he's obviously going to be in that McDavid conversation, but I still think that you need a night like tonight where, Matthews and Nyes both get 3 points. They combine for 15 shots on goal. Matthews had 9, Nyes had 6, and they were just deadly tonight. They were all over the ice. They were hungry, and I need to see that a lot more often for the Leafs for them to have any real shot at just having how many teams they have to jump in the standings at this point. It's crazy. Um, Wall looked pretty sharp tonight. Again, he gave up 5 goals. Not necessarily impressed with that. So it is what it is. They won. Speaking of goaltenders, though, Still absolutely no word on Anthony Stolarz whatsoever. He seems to just be vacated the planet at this point, and yeah, it's frustrating. It's frustrating about the injuries in this team. I've talked about it before. I just want to know where he's at. I understand it's not necessarily not any of my business, but at the end of the day, last year you had two of the best goalies in the league, the best tandem pair, and they both been hurt a lot this year, but now one of them came back and he's having a pretty solid run here. And the other one, if you just don't even know if he's even alive or dead at this point. So, I don't think anyone in the Leafs is ever going to hear this, but just why can we not get an update on what's going on with Stolarz? We talked a bunch of shit about his team, which was warranted. I'll give you that. And then after that, he just was awful. And then he gets a little bump or strain, and then he's just out forever now. Like, I don't know. It's a frustrating thing to see because I want to see that tandem back up and running because it would give them a hell of a shot at least recovering this season. So I don't know. And the last point that I gotta say is, God, Brady Tkachuk is still so annoying. Every time we play Ottawa, I think the Leafs have a pretty good chance of winning. Ottawa's not a pushover team. They're good. They're definitely competitive. But Brady Tkachuk is just such a pain in the ass every time you play them. He's in every scrum. He's in every fight. He's tough. He's tough to play against. He's like the modern Brad Marchand of the NHL now. And, if he's on your team, you love it. I have to say, I'd be loving it. I'd be a lot of compliments. But if you're playing against him, it's such a head shaker. It's frustrating. So I don't know. It's part of the game. Well, what are you gonna do, right? So whatever. But hey, Leafs get a win, 7-5. Happy for it tonight. New year coming up soon. Gonna be hopefully some bright spots in this new year. So appreciate everyone tuning in. I will see you next game and have a good night.